Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everyone. So we are gathering today for the session two of the course Game and XR Development with Unity. We have had two prior sessions. One was an introductory session, and one was the first session. So this was the objective of the course, which we discussed quite a bit in detail in the last session. So for the next at least 10 to 12 sessions, we'll be in the first three areas, which is Unity basics and learning about scripting in C Sharp and how we implement different techniques and how we implement those things in Unity. And then some game development basics, how we design gameplay mechanics, what kind of functions are there, then adding effects, sound effects, visual effects, and then animations. And then eventually moving on to VR and AR development and trying to implement what we learn in the basics of Unity. How do we implement that in the XR development pipeline, as well as trying to learn XR specific things. So for today's session, uh, starting today, it will be everything will be more hands-on. We'll learn about Unity Hub, then the Unity interface, navigating the Unity interface. There are different views inside the interface. Then we'll see what the scene view is, navigating that view. We'll learn about importing assets, camera, game objects, and how do we organize the projects in Unity. Like we'll try to cover as much as possible as per the time, whatever time permits. So that's now we just move to Unity. Uh, there's one thing that I miscommunicated in the last session was basically when the thing where how to actually go about registering for Unity student ID. Apparently, GitHub does not do it anymore. I checked a bit later. It is done through something called Share ID. So Share ID is another platform which basically approves your student status. So you get approval through that, and then you can get access to Unity student uh, program. But other than that, so basically what you'll do is I am assuming that everyone is here, everyone has installed Unity Hub, and at least they are aware, like they are at this screen. So since our last session, we discussed this. So if anyone is not here, either ask someone else or after this session, contact me somehow or just get the installation done at least because starting today's session, a lot of the things, everything will be hands-on. I'll tell you some things and then the next few days you have to implement those things, try to explore, because if you don't do it then you'll not really learn anything as such. So starting with Unity Hub, uh, basically there are, this is how you would get the interface. This is where your projects will be mentioned. So right now, like I have two projects that are there, something called cog screen and something called game, which is, this is the path where the projects are stored. Then when was the last time these projects were opened, and what is the different, which version of Unity was basically used to implement these projects. So you can see all these things in the list of projects. So why do we need to actually manage different versions of Unity? Why do we need Unity Hub? Is basically one of the major reasons is because to manage the different versions of Unity. So Unity is a very developing program. It releases a new version of it itself. Unity releases a new version almost every 3 days, 4 days, in beta versions, almost every single day. So, and almost long-term support versions almost every few weeks. So basically, you need to manage. If you start one project in one version and you want to do another project in a different version, or if you have a project where which you are, let's say, getting from some other person and it is an older version of Unity, then you need to manage it, install that version. So a lot of the things they work from older version to newer version. It will be easier to translate. from newer version to older version, it will not be easier. So there's a lot of mix and match. So this is why we need Unity Hub at least to give us some semblance of sanity that we have these many versions installed. These are the projects that are there in this version. This is how we are managing this project, this and all those things. So if we go to the installs tab, so there are four tabs that you see here. The installs tab, if you go, you'll see what kind of versions you have installed here. So there are three things that three tabs here. All, so it will list all the versions, official releases. This will list the uh, official releases that you have installed, and pre-releases will be the beta or the alpha versions of the software that you install. So how do you actually install it? Is basically go to install editor and you will get the latest versions of the LTS. So this is the version that you should generally install, but there are a lot of beta versions that pre-releases are there. So like this is an alpha version. This is not even beta. So you can install this also. So like you see the official in the official releases, if you go see LTS, the latest version is 2021.3.4 F1. So right now in the LTS support, 2022 version has not come. But if you see the normal other versions, 2022 is there. So you can install this or this. So for our purposes, we'll be installing 2021.3.4 F1. So if you can see, I have already installed that. And you can basically also see uh, what different versions, what different builds you can basically make from it. So like for 2021 .3.4 open, I have installed Android and Windows. So I can make builds for Android and Windows. So and I have another version which is 2020.3.32 open, some other version. For this, I also have WebGL. So I can also make builds for the web using this. So, but I can add anything, add modules whenever I want, different modules that I want to add whenever I want. So again, going back to what you want to do is you will get this screen, you will click on install. So because I've already installed this, I can't go there, but let's say I click on installing this. So I'll get this list. And now what do I do with this list? I will basically check Android support because if you're on iOS, if you're on a Mac, then you can also click iOS support and Windows build support. These are two things if you're on Windows. If you're on Mac, then Mac build support. So depending upon what system you're on, and also you can select WebGL to basically build web-based systems. But for mostly for VR and AR, you'll mostly use Android. For VR, if it is Oculus or some standalone platform, then mostly it is Android. If it is PC, then it can be Mac or Windows or Linux, different kinds of platforms. And then you can select documentation. This will basically provide you an offline version of the Unity documentation, which is specific to the version that you're installing, but you can also access this online. So if you want to save disk space of around 500 MBs, there's no need to install this. Then you can add different language packages, which we don't generally need. So these are, and then once you do this, then you click on continue, and then this will ask you for some permissions, and then it will start installing. So this will take around 10 to 12 GBs of your space, of your hard disk space, and then you can install this. So at least install one version and install the latest version, which is the 2021.3.4 F1 LTS. So this is what we'll be using for our whole sessions. So the next tab here is the Learn tab, where basically there are different uh, tutorials and projects that you can explore. So just go through this, and it's a lot of resources are available, and you can try whatever you want after you have some basic understanding of how things work. Then you can come here and try different things out, and all those things can be done, right? And then there's community, because a Unity community is very good. You can ask questions, you can read blogs. So on the Unity blog, you can read the blogs, answers, you can ask questions. There are forums, there's live help. Live help is paid, I guess. And then there's Unity Play, where you can publish your works for other people to see and give you comments and things like that. Then there's Unity Pulse, which again is directly getting feedback, directly giving feedback to the Unity for some kind of feature that you see that you need and things like that. So this is the whole of Unity Hub. And when you join in, this one more thing that you'll have to do is you'll have to go and do manage licenses. So if you get the student version, you will basically add it and you add it with activate with serial number. You will get a mail of a serial number. Then you put that serial number here. If you don't have this, then just activate get a free personal license. It will ask you a few questions and you will be able to get this started. So without a license, you will not be able to open and run Unity. So now let's actually make a project. So there are two ways to go about it. One is open, which is basically to open a project that you already have in your disk, or a Unity remote project. Remote project is basically something that is saved on Unity Cloud. So Unity has recently changed its architecture a bit. The version control systems have changed. A lot of things have recently changed. So you can access a lot of things from the cloud as well. There are a lot of new services available from Unity. So we'll look into those as well. So for now, our purpose is basically to make a new project. So let's click on new project and you'll get this window where there are a few things on the left side, few things on the right side, and some options on the middle. So let's first look at what is on the left side. There is all templates. So there are on the middle, there are three kinds of templates: core, sample, and learning. So core is basically only three templates are a few templates are there in core, which is basically the very basic empty kind of environments. There won't be anything, but these are different environments that you can start from. So like there's a core for VR, there's a core for AR, there's a code for third person, there's a code for first person, then different things. But generally, if you generally what we do is we generally start with a 3D core or a 2D core, depending on what kind of game you want to build, and then add whatever you want. This core will basically generally add some initial packages for you. Then there's samples, which are basically so HDRP is basically high definition rendering pipeline. URP is universal rendering pipeline. We learn about rendering pipelines in the future. It is basically how Unity chooses to render the scene that you're building. So you can basically look into some samples that are available. This is basically this keeps on changing the samples depending on what new feature has arrived. So I guess this is the recent samples that are available. And then learning, there are certain projects that you can look into already that are built that you can open and change things, code things differently, try to see, and it'll walk. It will give you a learning experience. There are courses available on Unity Learn. You can walk through them and do this. So then again, going back to our what we want to do is we open with 3D core, and then we on the right side we give a name to the project. So this is project name. Let's uh, give it tips. We are course Unity course. And where do I want to save it? So if we click on this, it will give me a location of where I can save it. If I close this, I just want to save it in Unity projects only. So I'll go ahead with this. And then all I have to do is next on click project, create project. And it will take some time to open, but just 2-3 seconds, not much. So till this opens, in the meantime, if there are any questions, we can take questions till then. You can raise hands or type in the chat if there are any questions till now.
Just as a reminder, if students have queries, they can simply put it in the chat box. Thank you.
think I'm opening this specific Unity version for the first time. That is why it's taking a bit longer.
So people are again asking if about a rundown for the license.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's go back here. So basically, there are two kinds of licenses that you can use. If you go to manage license, once you installed Unity Hub, you go to manage licenses, and then you click on add. So there are two kinds of licenses that you can use here. One is through a Unity Pro license, which you will get through the student version. The second is a personal license. So if you have a Unity student license, you will get a mail, or you can see in the dashboard, you will get a serial number. So the serial number is something like this. Like I can't show you here, but if you get something called something with a serial number, you will get the professional license like this. And if you don't have a serial number, then you can just click on get a free personal license, and then it will get you just agree and get personal edition license. It will basically, some conditions are there that you are an individual, you don't have, you're not earning anything from what you're making, things like that. And then you just agree to this. They might ask you a few more questions and they'll allow this license. All you have to do is first log in and then come here, add. If you have a serial number, add with a serial number. If not, then get a free personal license. Is that clear? Can Unity run smoothly on integrated GPU? If you can tell me the other specs, how much RAM do you have, which processor do you have, then I'll let you know. You can look at the least minimum requirements for Unity on online. You can search it. Is it required? Maths, yeah, a lot of maths is required. Unity makes a lot of the things easy for you, so you don't have to do computational geometry and computer graphics. But some simple maths like deciding shape or deciding the trajectory, things like that, you will require maths. Some other mathematics goes into creating game AI, state machines, things like that. uh, Depending upon what kind of thing you want to do, once you learn Unity and once you learn VRAR, uh, you'll require that level of maths. It depends what you want to do with it. 8 GB RAM, i5. Yeah, I don't think it will be an issue. You'll be able to run at least the basic things. But just in case, I'll check the minimum versions and I'll let you know the next session, or you can check it online. You'll check minimum requirements for Unity. It'll show it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think Unity has opened up. Yeah. So this is the scene that you'll uh, open up with, and there are four more major things here that you see by when it opens up. One is on your left side, which is known as hierarchy. This is hierarchy. One is on your bottom, which is a project window. One is on your right, which is an inspector window, and one is here, which is a scene window. This I want to dock somewhere. Can I? Okay. So uh, now in the four windows, these four windows and two more windows which are hidden that you see. One is game window, this window coming out to scene. One is console window, which is here. So these are six windows that are basically your complete Unity experience. This is where you will do everything. So this is right now it is organized in such a way that this is called as the default view, where you have access to four windows at one time. You can do different things with the layout of this. So basically, if you go to this section on the right most corner, top corner, there's a drop down called as this is select editor layout. If you click on it, there are a few options already available. So like we are on default right now. If I click on tall, I'll get this view. Again, my four screens are there, which I had: hierarchy, project, inspector, and scene. And there's I can also use wide, which is this. Again, I have my four windows. I can use four split, which is basically dividing my scene view into different things. I can like a top view, front view, right view, and a perspective. And then I can do a 2 by 3 split where I can see my scene and game view together. And I have hierarchy, project, and inspector. So these are a few different layouts that you can generally see. Generally, people or at least I work in this view, and I take the game view down here. So this is something that mostly I work with. Uh, and the other view that is generally that I've seen people use is the default view with the game view on the side. So there's all these windows there, like you can drag them out, bring them out. It can act as a separate window also. Like let's say I close it, then I can add the window as well. Add tab, add game. So I can add that tab as well. And again, let me bring it out here. So now I have brought it out again, and I have this interface. So I'll just it and this I'll take here. So yeah, so this is the general interface. Again, four windows are most important: hierarchy, project, inspector, and scene. Then there are two more windows that are important: game view and console view. So coming back to this. So now what are these different windows actually responsible for, starting with the project window? So let's make this big. So project window is basically your project folder. So if I go to this and I do show in Explorer, so this is how when you create a Unity project, we created a project called WIPS Unity course, right? So if I open it, this is what has been created when I create a Unity project. So assets folder, library, logs, packages, project settings, temporary files, and some user settings. So in this folder, if I open project settings, there's a text file called as project version. This is a text file. This project version file tells me which version of Unity I am using. Okay. So right now we opened it with 2021.3.4 FM. So if you don't have access to Unity or Unity Hub, this is where you can check which version of the project, which version of Unity was the project actually made in. And then basically whatever you make in Unity goes in the asset folder. So this is what the project folder is, and this is what you see in the this view of the project view. This is basically what you see. So the assets folder is what you see here, and the other folder that you see here is this packages folder. So packages are basically different kinds of uh, smaller helping packages that you get along with your Unity. So we'll talk about packages and different assets right now in some time. But basically, you can see two packages, two folders here. One is the assets folder and one is the packages folder. Packages folder basically, if you go here in again back to this, it's basically a JSON file, which is your manifest file in the projects folder in your project folder where the assets folder is located. So this is the root folder of the project. In the root folder, there's a folder called packages. In the packages folders, there's a file called as manifest. So this is a JSON file. If you're familiar with the JSON format, it's a format that is generally used to store different basically data in a key value pairs of data. So basically we are here storing the dependencies. So this is basically a list of different packages that are there along with their version number. Okay. So if you want to remove some package that is causing you some trouble, or you don't want to use for some reason, then you can remove it from here as well. So you can delete that line from here, and Unity while compiling won't install that package by default. But we'll talk more on what packages are and how we use different packages later. So this is the assets folder in the scene. And then what do we actually have in the assets folder here? So there's a folder that was by default made for us, which is called scenes. When we open scenes, there's a folder, there's a file in it, which is, if you can see below down here, this is sample scene.unity. So .unity is the extension that the scene for files have in Unity, which basically scenes basically are different smaller portions of your environment. So like, let's say you have a game which is a first person shooter game, which basically has a starting point and an ending point, and a person starts from one point, shoots his way through some enemies and end at a second point. And then from the second point, when the player enters through a door, another level opens up. So this one starting to ending point, this is one level, this is one scene. So this is something called, this is something that you can store in one scene of Unity. And then once the person passes through that gate, you can call on the second scene. So you can create and store different scenes here in Unity. So like, when you first create an empty project, Unity will give you a sample scene.unity file. You can use it, delete it, whatever you want, doesn't matter. So where do I actually see this file now? So like, how do I actually know what is in it, what it is holding, things like that. So if I double click on it, you see that this opened up here, which already was open, but this is something that it holds. So from the projects tab, if I open the scene dot, so basically scene, which basically means any dot unity file, if I double click on it, it will open up in the hierarchy tab. So right now, by default, if when we create any scene, it will give you a scene with main light, main camera, and directional light. I'll talk about what this is in a bit, but basically your hierarchy folder is your holding your scene. It can hold multiple scenes. There are things that can overlay on top one scene on top of other scene, but we'll talk about that later. There are additive scenes. So a lot of things can be done. But basically hierarchy is the most important part, where basically you see what actually is in the environment that you're building is actually in the uh, like thing that you're building. Okay. And then basically, like, now we have created a project. When we created a default project, it comes with two things, camera and light. So in general, when we talk about VR or any game or any simulation, there are, whatever you are viewing in a game is basically represented to you through a camera. So if I click on this, this is a camera that I'm using in my game. So if I build something or render something in this environment, in this game, whatever I will see eventually would be basically through this camera only. So this is a virtual camera of sense, and whatever I'll view is through this camera. So if I double click on this, it can take me to its location. I can zoom in, scroll in through, if I'm scrolling my mouse right now and I'm going there. There are other ways to navigate the scene, but I'll talk about right now. But next I want to talk about the inspector window. So for this camera, when I click on this camera, you see that the inspector window is changing, right? On my right side, there's the inspector window, which is changing. So if I click on directional light, it is changing. If I click on camera, it is different. If I can click on sample scene, there's nothing there. If I click something here, sample scene, then there's something here. So depending upon what I click on, inspector window changes. So by the name inspector also, it is clear that it is something that is inspecting the element that you have clicked on. So like right now, I have clicked on main camera, and I can see the what actually constitutes the main camera, what things are making up the main camera. So main camera basically has something called a transform, which basically has position, rotation, and scale. So we'll talk about this in just a bit, what position mean, what rotation mean, and what scale means. Next, it has something called a camera. This is again an element which basically defines how this camera has to behave. So there are different aspects in this, something called clear fags, background, So we don't really know what all this means, but we know that changing these settings will do something to the camera. So these are the attributes of the camera. Then there's an audio listener. So every Unity scene can have only one audio listener, which is basically mostly attached to the player person, and the player person is mostly the camera. That is why it is by default attached here. Next, so this is the inspector window. Basically, wherever you click, you will be able to see that elements, those that objects elements in the inspector window. So next window is basically this scene window. I'll just put this again aside and then come back to the scene window. And so what basically is the scene window? Scene window is basically an infinite world. If I so right now, if you can see my screen, it's showing which mouse button I'm holding or which mouse button I'm clicking. So just to make it easier for you, I'm using this. So like right now, I'm using the right mouse button. I've clicked it down and I'm moving around. So I can move around in the scene and see what all is there. So like I had added two things, right? One was a direction light, that is the light. This is the camera. These are just representations because light and camera, they don't hold physical meaning. They don't actually, they are not visually visible in the scene. So they are just representations that you can see here. Okay, so this is one way that I can move in the scene view. And if I can zoom in and out through my scroll in the mouse. Then if I click right mouse button down is pressed, and then I use WASD keys or arrow keys, I can move front and backward. Not through arrow keys, sorry, only through WASD keys. So let me open this up. Now if I press W, I'm going forward. If I press S, I'm going backwards. If I press A, I'm going left. If I press D, I'm going right. If I press Q, I'm going below. If I press E, I'm going up. Okay. So W is forward, S is backward, D is left, A is left, D is right, Q is down, E is up. So these are basically some of the things that you use generally to navigate in the scene view. Next, you have this on top here, which is basically what orientation this right now you're seeing as. So right now this is something called a perspective view, which is basically like, see, when I'm changing, moving, this thing is also moving with me. So it's basically showing my perspective of the scene where I'm viewing it from, where the X, Y, and Z axes are. So if I want to view from the top, I'll click on the Y axis, and then I'm seeing the view from the top. I can see the view from front, which is the Z axis. I can see the view from the right, which is the X axis. So this is how X, Y, and Z axes are there in general. Depending upon how you set up your environment, you can change the axes. But this is generally like front, backward, right, forward. They hold some meaning because in code also you will use something called vector3 dot up, vector3 dot forward. So that corresponds to the axes that are here. But it is up to you actually to uh, manipulate how you want to do what front means for you. It is up to you. But generally, front would mean Z axis, top would mean Y axis, and right would mean X axis. So this is how you can navigate different, like see different views in the scene view. Then next we have uh, some options here, which view tool, move tool, uh, rotate tool, scale tool, and rect tool and transform tool. So I want to talk about this, but let's just finally look at game view. So game view is basically your, like I said, everything that you see is your camera's representation. So game view is just showing you a display of what the final game would look like. So when I click on play here, so this is how you can play a game inside Unity. When you click on play, it will basically do a quick build. and run it here. It will obviously run through all the code. It will throw any compiler errors or runtime errors. Everything will be doing. It will be doing, but it's not a final build of the game. So things might change when you actually build. Some things might be different. So in the game view, this will basically be your camera's view. So if I uh, write the code to make the player move, so player would be the camera, and if I write the code for WASD, here WASD won't work by default. So right now I'm pressing right button and pressing W, it's not working because here I don't have any code written yet. So this view is basically your final view of the game thing would be like this. And I have some options here, which is game and simulator. Simulator is basically for mobile devices. You can, it has a set of mobile devices that you can choose from basically to see how it will look on a mobile device. And then I have displays that I can choose from, display 1, display 2. So I have 8 displays, up to 8 displays. What this basically means is that my camera is set to display on which display. So like if you see here, if I select camera and then go to the inspector window, the target display on my camera element is display 1. So that is why I'm only able to see in display 1. So if I change this to display 4 and I go to display 4, then I'll be able to see in display 4. Then there's an aspect ratio that you can set. Free aspect basically means that you can uh, whatever you change here will basically not affect how things are in the environment. So this generally has to do with scaling the UI and things like that. What things are as it is visible in the scene when you open it. Depending upon how you set up your game, aspect ratio matters a lot. So you can set up different aspect ratios. Some are already available. You can add more aspect ratios. You just need to give the aspect ratio here. Then the scaling, basically you can scale this. Then there's this play focus, play maximized, play unfocused. So if I click on play focus, play maximized, and I click on play, then this screen will maximize when I'm playing. So these are some different settings that you can use while you're uh, like just testing and things like that. Mute audio. You can see some stats. Gizmos are basically these things. The visual representations of the camera and light. Do you want to see them in the game view for debugging or not? So you can turn off and turn on gizmos in the game view. Generally, when you actually build the game, you will not be able to see gizmos. Gizmos, you can select what things to display and not, 3D icons, what size they should be. So like if I turn this on, how do I want them, which size do I want it to be? So this is all just so that you can debug something, right? So these are the 5 different we have covered. Now, last is console. Console is basically where your messages will come. There will be 2 kinds of messages, 3 kinds of messages. One will be warning, which is this. Sorry, this is warning. I think it's not showing anything. So yeah, so this is warning. The last one would be errors, and the first one is debug logs. So there's a function called debug.log which basically whenever you use that or just print, this is where it will print. In when you write a code, if you print something or debug log something, this is where it will show up. Other than that, errors and warnings will show up here. So this is where the console is the place where you can basically generally debug your game, whatever you are building. This will help you debug. So you have some options like clear on play, clear on build, clear on recompile, uh, things like that. Collapse, error pause. Error pause will basically pause whenever the first error occurs. So do you want things to work in editor or not? Where do you want to like debug it? So this some options are there, right? So yeah, so these are all the 6 windows we have covered. Next, let's look into how some things are done in the scene view. So like what are like next we want to talk about game objects. So what are game objects? So anything that you have inside your uh, sample scene. So like not sample scene, anything that you have inside your hierarchy inside a scene. So this is your scene. This is the major thing that you have seen. anything that you create inside it will be called a game object. So main camera is a game object, directional light is a game object. Whatever you create next would be a game object. So if you see on the top here, there's a tab called as game object. When I click on it, I can create certain different kinds of game objects from here. I can create an empty game object. I can create an empty child. Um, these are, yeah, not required right now. Let's say I create an empty game object. So empty, any object, any game object has to have a transform. So now what this transform actually means, for to explain that, let me first show you more game objects that we can create. So you can create some 3D objects: cube, sphere, capsule, cylinder, plane, quad, uh, text, some legacy text mesh is there. So that's so some other 3D objects, terrain, trees, and then there are some effects, particle effects, light. You can different kinds of lights that you can create, different kinds of audio, different kinds of video. UI, there are different elements. UI toolkit is there. Then you can create another camera. So like I had one camera, I created another camera. But how do I know which is the main camera? Like this main camera is written here, but how do I know this is the actual main camera? This is something through a tag that I know main camera. So there are, we'll talk about tags later, but if I add more cameras here, this is how I'll know that this is still my main camera. So if I go to the other camera, it's not the main camera. And if I make this main camera, the first main camera should not be main camera. So you should only have one main camera in the scene, right? So let's go back a bit. Let me remove the camera. All right. So I now have one camera. So now let's add something, a 3D object to basically see some of the things in action. So I add a cube here. So now I have a cube, and you see that there are, for a 3D object, there are certain things in the environment that it in the inspector window that it has. One is the transform, which has position, rotation, and scale. So any, like I said, any game object has to have a transform. This is basically the minimum requirement of the game object. So any game object will have a transform, which basically means that it has some uh, position in the environment. It has some rotation that is defined. It has some scale. Even an empty game object that we created. So this was an empty game object. It does not have any components, but it has a transform. So this is what basically something that we use to access the in the environment. This location, we can use the rotation. For an empty game object, rotation and scale doesn't really matter, but position might matter. So let's come back to the cube and let's go back to talk about some different elements that are here. For now, let's just say that position we understand, rotation we understand, scale we understand, but we'll look into this more. Then there's something called cube mesh. So like if I go near the cube, I can see that there's a cube mesh filter that is there. Mesh filter is here. In this mesh, I've added cube. So if I change this, if I make this capsule, even if I added cube, now I can change it to whatever I want. I can make it a cylinder. I can make it a sphere. I can make it a plane, right? And I can make it a quad. Quad is also similar to a plane, like it's smaller, but you can only see it from one side. So going back to cube, so mesh filter is basically something that allows gives you how it should be rendered in the scene, and then renderer is basically telling you how to render the mesh filter. And there are certain options. We'll talk about this later. What materials to apply, what are the lightings, what are probes, what are some other settings that can be applied. Then there's something called as box collider. Again, we'll talk about this later in when we talk about physics. So this is something that is allowing this to collide or to move in the environment with other objects, things like that. So for right now, let's just focus on the transform. So like if I added this and now if I go to my scene, me set it up with respect to the camera so that I can see it in the game view. So this is how generally a lot of the work will be done. You will switch between different views. You will I'm on the opposite side of the camera. I'll just bring it here. So now it is in the view of my camera, right? So this is how a lot of the things will be done when you set up a scene. Like just to set up a cube, I had to change 3 times my view and things like that. So generally, this is a lot of what goes when you're creating a virtual environment, when you're creating a big virtual environment, a lot of view changing, seeing things from different perspectives that will go on. So now coming to my cube, there's so like I double clicked on this. That's why I was able to uh, focus on it. If I go somewhere else and then I click on cube, I can also click F. Okay. I think right now it is not working. Oh yeah, now it worked. So if I click F, I can again, it's the same thing as double click. If I click on this and I'll just open this so that you can see what I'm clicking. Clicking F is basically taking me there. If I click on cube and click F, something is wrong here. This is generally, this will take it here to basically focus on this. Yeah, so now if I want to basically change the position, we have already seen. So like by dragging it around, if you see, pay attention to this transform and pay attention to the position in the transform. Like if I'm dragging it along this axis, the blue axis, which is the Z axis, see that the Z axis is changing, right? If I click on the red axis and I'm pulling it around, the X axis is changing. If I change my view a bit and then pull it around the green axis, then the Y axis is changing. So if I go into a bit of a different mode and I click here and then I shift it, then two axes are being changed at the same time. I can also use whatever, like basically set up whatever I want based on these three axes, right? So I can move it however I want to move it. Then, so this is what this was basically about position. So then let's talk about rotation. How do I change the rotation? And also position can be changed from here also. So if I basically click on this X, I'm clicking on this left button down and then moving my mouse to right, that is basically increasing the value of X in the positive direction. If I move it towards left, that will basically change the value towards the negative direction. I can also actually change the value to some absolute value, like let's say I want to write 0 and hit that. Similarly with Y, I want to change. Similarly with Z, I can do. So all the values you can change from here as well. So now let's say I want to change the rotation. So one way is basically to change the rotation from here, right? You see this, it's changing, it's rotating across the x-axis. The other way is to basically use this tool. This is the rotate tool. If you go here, then if I click on this axis again, I am able to rotate it through the x-axis on the x-axis. Green is y-axis, blue is z-axis. So I'm able to rotate these things. I'm able to change the value around here. And then the last tool is the scale tool, which is here. So I can scale the value across the x-axis or the y-axis or the z-axis. And then if I want, I can scale it all together as well by just clicking at the center box. And if I go to right, it will scale up. If I go to left, it will scale down. Okay. And then I have the something called as a rect tool. This basically helps in this scaling only in a sense, but it's basically create for more for UI than for these kinds of things. So like I can't scale, I'm able to scale in one direction only, you see properly, right? So generally rect tool is for something called as rect transform, which is generally used in UI elements and it's for scaling UI elements. Then I have a transform tool, which has basically all the tools that I had, rotation, scaling, and transform position together. So I can scale, I can rotate, and I can change the position. Now, generally, if I want to use Unity, I'll have one of my hands on the keyboard and one of my hands on the mouse in general when I'm setting up the scene like this. So I don't, if I'm here, if I'm doing this, I don't want to keep going back here and changing the position tool to this and then going back to the rotate tool and do this. So what I'll generally do is basically click on, I have some shortcuts to access these as well. So like F was a shortcut to center the selected element. I have a shortcut, few shortcuts that will basically change these tools for me. So if I click on Q, this is the first tool, which is the hand tool. If I click on W, this is the second tool, which is the move tool. If I click on E, it is the third tool, which is the rotate tool. If I click on R, it is the uh, scale tool. And then T is the rect tool, and Y is the last tool, right? So I'm able to use, I'm here, I'm moving, the hand tool basically lets me move around the scene. If I click in on the left button itself and I move around the scene like this, then let's say I want to change my position, I click right button, I change my position a bit like this, I go here, then I want to change the position of this, I make it like I use W and change the position. I want to rotate it a bit, I click on E and rotate it. Then I can click on R and scale it down. So this is how you would generally work, generally set up an environment uh, in like set up different objects in the environment. So generally in VR, there are few tools that are there outside of Unity that help you model the assets like we discussed. So modeling, 3D modeling and rendering, those are important aspects of VR and AR. So for that modeling, rigging, animation, there are tools like Blender and Maya available that help you do those things. So if you want to learn those, you can learn those separately. If you want, I can share resources, specific resources for Blender, which are really good, and you can learn small things at least in that. In Unity, there's something called as Pro Builder, which helps you do small things. So I'll share a list of small resource with you, like a list of playlists with you, which will help you walk you through the Pro Builder, which you don't need to start right away because there are like we've just started. So in a few weeks, when you are a bit more familiar of how to work with Unity, then you can look up Pro Builder and you can learn that. So that will help you model or change some of the elements. Like right now in the by default in Unity, you have certain game objects which are just 3D objects, which are cube, sphere, capsule, cylinder, and plane. So if you want to change these, let's say make a staircase out of cubes, you can do that in Pro Builder. Let's say make a plane with a hole in it, you can do that in Pro Builder. So you can at least do some small things while prototyping inside Pro Builder. So it's an important tool in Unity that you should learn. So that's something we can discuss in the class as well, or because it's easy to learn on your own. Once you know the basics, I can share resources and we can discuss the doubts. So that that's the thing that you can do. Apart from that, basically, once you set these kind of things up, then the next thing is how do you set up behavior inside this? How do you set like actually implement movement, implement different things? So we'll be discussing those things in the coming session. So finally, like if once you set this thing up and like now you want to see what your camera is actually seeing. So you go to the game view and this is what my camera is actually seeing after I've set up everything and all those things, right? So it's 5 o'clock. We are on time. Are there any doubts? So for today's session, we discussed Unity Hub. We discussed the Unity interface. We discussed how we move inside the scene view. We did not discuss the assets. We discussed parts of camera. We discussed objects, and we did not discuss organizing projects. So we'll discuss these two things in the next session. So that's all from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask now or you can contact me. Yeah, that's all. There's something called as TopMate, which my link is topmate.io/Vishal. If you want to set up a meeting with me, you can go here and it'll basically give you slots that you can book with me and we can have a one-on-one discussion. Otherwise, you can reach me through your student coordinators or your course coordinators as well.
So we do have one question. It's from
Yeah.
Jitesh. He's can we import game objects from other versions as well?
Yeah. There's so basically game objects are things that you're keeping in the scene view, right? So there are ways that you can import. We'll talk about that. So there's something called as prefabs. You can convert your game objects into prefabs and then export it from a different version and then import it here. So that helps you. So if you are writing your code in modular way, that is what I meant. Like that is what we'll discuss in organizing your code in Unity. So if you write the code in a modular way, and if you structure your environment, whatever you're building in a modular sense, so basically each part or each module is responsible for a small thing. Then while changing the versions or changing the uh, just using this module somewhere else, it's easier to export it and import it somewhere else. Are there any tubes available? Is that does that answer the question? If you are fine, Jitesh. Next question from Pranav. Are there any tools available on Unity itself for using the GUI and tools? Yeah. There are lots of uh, resources that are available. So uh, like it's all over the internet. There's something called as Unity Learn also. So you can check there and make some special shapes from scratch other than the provided ones. Yeah, like I said, making special shapes, there are two ways of making shapes. One is you use an external tool like Blender or Maya to make your own shapes, or there's something called as Pro Builder in Unity, which I'll share the resource with you, some basic tutorial videos, and you can use Pro Builder inside Unity itself to at least prototype to some extent. It's a good tool. I think recently they've made a lot of different changes, so they're not as comparable to Maya and Max and Blender, but at least some basic shapes like rocks or staircases, buildings, some small buildings, doors, these things you can make, and even texture them. So basically, even paint them and make it look good, as like make it look what you want it to look like. So yeah, that's that. I hope that answers your question. When we import models from Max, materials are not available. Do we have to import materials also? So there are different file formats. There's a file format called as FBX. There's a file format called as OBJ. So as far as I am aware, when you import FBX, it generally has the material in, like FBX is an individual file. It has the material file also available. In when you do the same thing with OBJ, there's something called as an MTL file, which is the material file that is there. So you have to import that as well. So depending upon which format you are importing, you have to import textures and material files along with that. So if you import texture, you can apply those textures and Unity will by default create material files for you. So if you have a specific thing that is not working for you, if you already have something working, and if something specific is not working for you, you can reach out to me individually and we can talk about it. Is that fine? Tanu and Rohit, does that answer your question before?
Okay, sir. I think we can put up the form now,
Yeah.
and that's good. Oh, I did have a question, sir.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Unity itself, now can a camera be linked to a game object?
Yeah. So basically, generally, when you create a player, so camera in itself is a game object. Anything that you have inside the hierarchy, anything that has a transform on it is a game object. So that is how you reference all the things in the game, in the hierarchy. So generally, when you code, you want to get reference to an object. You don't know what the object is. Let's say I want to make a generalized sense. I can add a camera, add a cube, everything to a same variable. So I'll make it game object, not camera or not cube. So that is how I can access. So that is why anything that you have in the hierarchy is a game object. So camera in itself is a game object, and any game object can have parents and childs. So when we basically create players, we attach the camera to another object, to another parent object. So camera basically becomes the child object to a parent object. The parent object will have the code of walking around, seeing around, collisions, different things that you want it to have. So you'll maybe, let's say you are creating a shooter games and you'll add a gun to it. So the gun will become the either the child of the camera depending upon where you are placing it in the environment. If it's a desktop based game and you don't want the gun to move around, it's in the center of the screen like this, something like this, then it becomes the child of the camera. If you want the gun to be freely available in the hands or something like that, in when you are in VR, then you make the gun the child of the player object. So depends on how you want to create, and obviously you can attach the camera to any other game object.
Got it, sir. So everyone is informed that the link has been posted in the chat. You are required to switch on your cameras for one photograph and finish the form in around 15 minutes. Thank you so much. Just the reminder again, please switch on your camera so we can take a picture real quick as it's for the records.
Fine, everyone. I'll take your leave. Bye bye, guys.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Okay, everyone's requested to please fill the forms as soon as possible.